You're listening to the Gruntworkers Show, and I'm your host, James C. Zollman. Here's one of my favorite snippets from this episode.
I remember when we were working on the popchips brand, COSTCO said, hey, if you didn't go with a black bag, you could probably save another 20% off this price and get us down to a lower price. And we're like, okay, yeah, you're right. And if we put it in a paper bag full of shit, we could save even more money. But that's not who we are. popchips is a premium brand. We're 30% more than every other chip. We're not trying to be Lay's potato chip. We're trying to be a completely different chip and a different experience.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Gruntworkers Show. I am so excited. We have one of the original marketers, somebody who has impacted so many powerful brands on our show today. His name is Jeremy Smith. He's the president and founder at Launchpad. Jeremy, thank you for coming onto the show. Really a huge pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'm a big believer in the podcast format, so I'm really excited to get going.
Thank you. Wonderful. I'm excited to interview you here today. So let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so we're working on what I consider as kind of a standard project. It's all projects are exciting. They all have their unique challenges, and no project is exactly the same. And we're working with a client of ours called Vana, V-A-N-A Foods, and we work with them on their Costco business. But what makes us a little bit unique is that because of my background in design and advertising and marketing, we really spend time on making sure that the brand story is communicated throughout the packaging. And what happens in the food industry, food and beverage industry, is that a lot of brands, the founders of the companies, especially in this day and age with a lot of disruption and small food emerging brands that are coming in and kicking Kraft Heinz's ass, there's not a lot of experience necessarily in the beginning. So what happens is a founder of a company's got a great idea. He or she then goes out to a design firm and has the packaging designed, and then they come to us to take them to Costco, and I go, this packaging sucks. It won't resonate with the consumer. There's no emotion behind it. There's no connection. You've just got the buzzwords on here, and to me, it's very much so what. But and a lot of that has to do with how the design business and the advertising world kind of works. A lot of times it's the creative process often takes a backseat to money and the direction of the people that are running the company. So in this case with Vana, the firm that he worked with, they did an okay job on the design, but there was no story. So we spent about 4 hours with the founder of the company, taking him through the story. And, he didn't even realize what an amazing story he has. He's a true vegan. He comes from India, and he's got this amazing background that the consumer would never know because there's no message on the packaging and there's no story behind it. So basically all you've got are a bunch of nice artwork that someone designed with GMO-free and organic logos and no story. So he is not going to be able to separate himself in the marketplace. So what we're working with him on now is developing that story. And so we spent quite a bit of time framing that part of it out and getting in and understanding what is his passion? Why did he create this brand? And so not a lot of packaging firms want to spend the time doing that, but for us, we won't work with a client that wants to just come in and go, I just need a rebrand, because all you're doing is taking one person's mess and cleaning it up, and you're not advancing the process. And so for us, we really have to be involved with the client, understand them, walk in their shoes if that's truly possible, and help guide them through a path where we can really do this. And sometimes inspiration comes from all different places. We were working with another client called Kumana, and they were working with another firm. And I said, when they came to me, they wanted me to help them with COSTCO, and I said, I can't work with you. You don't, again, it was the same situation. You don't have a brand story. The packaging is hideous. It looks like it was done in 1983. It could easily be a Mexican soda pop from 1982. I said, you can't go to market with that. You have no chance at success. I said, you gotta fire the firm you're working with. They're giving you terrible advice. And so he came to us and said, okay, I'm willing to trust you. And again, we build those bonds. And one night, he's based in LA, and one night I'm watching Anthony Bourdain at 2 a.m, which is a common theme for me. It's not that I'm up at 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning. It just seems I do my best copywriting and ideas between 1 and 3 in the morning. And I was watching an Anthony Bourdain episode in LA on how the food world had changed. And so I immediately sent out an email and said, you got to watch this episode. So I sent it to the design firm we work with, which is Market Brand, and my buddy Eric Reed. And then the client Kumana and said, hey, we're going to meet in 2 weeks. You guys fly up from LA. We're going over to Marin. We're going to have an all-day meeting where we go through this. But you got to watch the Anthony Bourdain video, because that's going to get us moving in a direction. And it changed everything, and we wound up having an incredible creative process. But that's not the normal way that a lot of firms work. And so, sometimes you have to go somewhere else to get the client down the right path. And the brand wound up being very, very successful. So that's kind of how we work. And what, the Vanna project is what we're working on right now. And we've got 3 or 4 other projects in the hopper that'll start after the first of the year.
That's fantastic. So Launchpad, in a nutshell, is extremely intensive, exclusive rebranding for products that are specifically looking at getting into Costco or into a retail scenario and really make a big splash when doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have 2 groups. We have the branding and creative group, which is outside of Launchpad. That's called Market Brand. And then we have Launchpad, which is Costco representation. So we then work with the brand to get them into Costco and get on the shelves and hopefully be very successful, while they're also building their brand outside of Costco, out at Whole Foods or Sprouts or Erewhon or someone like that. And so it's, because of my experience working with ad agencies and design firms, Launchpad is almost like an ad agency in that we have a lot of partners. Like if somebody needs financing or an investment, we can introduce them to people. So I learned a lot being in the advertising world that model does work really well for a lot of clients who may need a variety of services. And in life, it's a lot of times much easier to go to one group that can bring everybody together instead of you having to go out and find all the companies on your own.
That makes a lot of sense, Jeremy. Can you tell us a little bit more about your creative workflow behind the scenes? What are the tools that you use? Any of your project management processes? Because it sounds like you have a very, very unique way of doing things, plus something that we don't see a lot. You have a lot of transformational experience behind you. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've learned over the years as far as what works for you and your project management process.
Okay, cool. So, well, it all goes back to 1980 when I went into the typography industry, which is something that most people today, if you're under 40, you probably don't know what the typography industry was. But the typography industry used to be one of the most important parts. That's where everything started on a creative process. And I worked for a guy named Drew Andreessen, who owned the largest typography house in LA. And we worked with people like Keith Bright and Jennifer Morla, um, uh, Jeff Goodby. We worked with a lot of really big ad agency and design firms. And I learned a lot from Drew. And, Drew was always this guy, who, was a young entrepreneur who was trying to shake up kind of, the typography industry was kind of craft based, like printing companies were. And he saw a bigger vision for the typography industry. And since we work with so many art directors and designers, it would really give me an opportunity to talk to and watch how these guys, work. And in the early 80s, there were more men than women in the business, but that's thankfully changed a lot. The creative mind, sometimes, you're out drinking and, all of a sudden an art director's designing and they get an idea and they're creating on a napkin. For a project they're going to be working on or are working on. And designers are a little bit different, than art directors. They think differently. They walk differently. They are doing often a very different type of work than an art director does. But so over the years, I watched that behind the scenes and learned a lot, doing it for like 25 years, and could see, this is how this art director works. This is how this designer works. And, there's a lot of ego involved. And so for typical clients that are pretty straight laced, going into a meeting and the art director, I was in this meeting one time with an agency. I don't think they're in business anymore, but they had the Mitsubishi account. And I was in there with the art director, and the account executive came in, which most account executives are hated by the creatives, came into the meeting and interrupted us. And the art director turned to the guy and said, get the fuck out of my office right now. We're doing important work here. Why don't you go out and get drunk? And that was kind of the scene, in LA during the 1980s. We didn't have 5-hour energy back then. And, sometimes a typical day for an art director was get in the office at 8 a.m. and go home at 4 a.m., catch a couple hours sleep. So there was a lot of cocaine use back in the 80s in LA. And that was kind of the 5-hour energy that kept them going. But one of the things I learned over the years was I had a chance meeting with Steve Jobs over at Apple and got a chance to talk to him about marketing. And he really kind of turned my world on its head, because he was very anti-focus groups. And, I had a discussion with him once. He said, if we had used focus groups for the iPod, the focus groups would have told us, don't develop an iPad. The Walkman is the item. Because what happens is focus groups are really, they're almost looking backwards, because the consumer is using their limited view to look at what they're already using. So if they're really happy with a Walkman, and then you bring 12 people into a room and show them an iPod, they might say, well, I'm really happy with what I have, so I'm not interested. And if you listen to marketing people, you would say, well, you know what, the focus group said no, we're going to kill this project. So Steve Jobs, his view was the consumer doesn't know what they want until you give it to them. And so it was the same thing with the iPhone. He said that if we had focus group this, the consumers were very happy with the BlackBerry. He says, I don't need to go into a focus group. They're going to tell me how much they love their BlackBerries and they'll never switch. He said, but when I bring the iPhone out, what's going to happen is they're going to want the iPhone and they're going to throw their BlackBerries away. Now, in a traditional corporate world, that's not how they think. But that was one of the geniuses of Steve Jobs, is that he didn't think the way most CEOs think. And creativity and typography and calligraphy were very important to Steve Jobs. And so I spent a brief amount of time with him working on a project, and learned probably more from him in that brief time, as far as changing my view as to how I looked at marketing people and marketing, and that I really began to work on something that he talked about, which is your gut. He said you have to know in your soul what it is that you're about. And he said most companies don't know what they're really about. So they're just a brand searching for consumers. And then you need marketing people because you don't have the answers and you want to make safe choices. So you use focus groups for that. And everyone knows that focus groups are a joke, but they make clients feel better because, any focus group can be manipulated to come out with whatever conclusion and direction the ad agency wants the client to go. So when we look at things, I don't want a whole bunch of marketing people telling us this is what needs to happen. I want to know what the soul of the founder and the entrepreneur is, and what are they trying to create. I need to know that first, because that's going to help us shape the direction of the company. So obviously, there's a whole different side to this, and I can understand why a lot of marketing people would disagree with me. But when you get out and you really do the work, you find out in the real world that things don't work the way you're taught by a college professor to get either an MBA or a marketing degree, and that gut instinct is, has a lot to do with how you're going to truly get from point A to point B successfully. Chobani's another great example of that, in that, they became the most successful Greek yogurt and one of the most successful yogurt companies of all time. And, I remember getting a call from them, and they said they're going to be $1 billion company in 5 years. And they had this plan, and none of it was based on marketing gurus and all this other stuff. It was just, a tremendous sales effort that drove the company, and a great product. But they had their gut instinct about how they were going to get there. It wasn't, well, I read this in Harvard Business Review, and Harvard Business Review said this case study says this is what we should do. And I'm not saying that Harvard Business Review is a bunch of bullshit. It's a case study. It's like, knowledge is not power. It's what you do with knowledge that determines whether it's powerful or not. So a lot of those things are really important, and you don't really hear them talk about it. And then the creative process, to me, is what's the most important within that realm of how you're going to communicate that, and how you're going to interact with people. If you look at, that's why designers are so obsessed with PMS colors and paper. A marketing person doesn't necessarily understand all that stuff. But you look at a can of a beverage that's on the shelf. Well, the first interaction for the consumer is the label. What does it say? What does that image convey, both consciously and subconsciously? You have to understand that. Then what's the next thing that happens? They pick it up, they read it. So what is that messaging? Then the next thing is smell. They pop it open. So they've got their expectations. And if that flavor is Meyer lemon, and you pop it open and it tastes too watermelony or something else for you, then the expectations of the product have been violated, and you're going to have, the mind, both consciously and subconsciously, has this immediate reaction to all the smells and then the taste and all these other things. It's such a complicated psychological process overall that it can't be boiled down to, well, 5,000 consumers said this. It's much more complicated, yet it's also very raw, and and then it's generational. Millennials, surprisingly, are much more story-oriented base, as to where boomers were less story and more about wanting to, consumption. And so for a marketer today, it's a much more complicated world. You used to have just print, and you used to just have television and collateral as forms of communication. And so, but now you've got a phone, you've got an iPad, you've got 20 different screen sizes. It's a very different world to communicate in, and for me, that's why I think today creative and authenticity is far more important. If you look at what Ryan Reynolds did with the gin brand that he worked with, I think the reason he was so successful is that Ryan Reynolds is one of the few celebrities. I don't like celebrity endorsements for the most part, but the way he introduced the product on Conan was an interesting concept, because here he comes on the show drinking gin, and then he tells the story about why he got into the business, and he's a partner in the company and all this other stuff. It was a very different moment in history with a brand where a celebrity came on, but you could tell from his passion and what he was sharing with Conan that he wasn't just a celebrity. If you didn't know who Ryan Reynolds was, you knew he knew a lot about gin and had a lot of passion for it. And I think in everything he does, he comes across as someone who's authentic, and he's not someone that he truly values his own personal brand. And so he has tremendous credibility, and prove that if you do things right the first time, that your odds for success are much better. So
Incredible. Wow. So your process is certainly very unique. And that's absolutely amazing that you had the opportunity to spend time with Steve Jobs. And of course, he is a visionary, a design genius, very creative. I think that's phenomenal that you're able to carry that process forward, along with all of the experience in typography and more. And I really liked what you said, how millennials today, and I think it's rubbing off a little bit on everybody. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But there's those classic two sides of the coin. There's form and function. And it seems like form is sort of where authenticity comes into play, the storytelling, the raw feel, the gut feel comes in. And function, that's where the boomers, hey, if it works, don't fix it type of a mentality. But these days, and the way strong brands, at least in the Launchpad way, and it's proven a successful way, is certainly about the story. It's about that authenticity. It's about the form. The function may be very similar to every other thing on the shelf, but if the story and the emotive feels that come from the design and the experience, that form factor really comes into play to really build strong brands. So that's fascinating, that process there that you go through. How do you translate, if you could spend a few minutes on this for us, Jeremy, how do you translate that gut feel, that story? Well, say you pulled that history from the founder, from the brand, you've got the essence in front of you, you understand what they're all about. How do you translate that into a creative brand or a campaign?
Well, that's the hard work, and that's why, thankfully, I work with somebody like Eric Reed at Market Brand, because I can't draw a straight line. I can write copy, but so So once you've built the foundation for the values of the brand and what the brand promises, then you begin to experiment with the mind, and you really translate that into different aspects. So for example, is the brand playful? What is it a serious brand? It really depends on what those values are. And so you then begin to, and it depends what the product itself is. If it's a drinking product that you're going to drink or eat, it's a different approach than if the product is electronics and they're going to interact with different things. But overall, generally you're going to go into 3 to 5 concepts of what that might translate into and what the color scheme might be. And a lot of that, as it comes together with the copy, for example, you might spend a month working on the form and function of the actual container that houses the if it's an electronics product or the beverage. What is the feel in your hand? How does that feel when the liquid is in there and it's cold? So a lot of those things are part of one process. And then the design is much more free-flowing, and based on all of the conversations you've had. A lot of times what we do is we'll throw different images of people and products and things up on the wall and then have the client react to it, like almost like a giant image of artwork, and watch them look at it and how they interact with it and what their emotional feelings are towards it. And in the end, the consumer almost always comes last in our process, because I don't know that the consumer is as important. And I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. But if you truly believe that the consumer doesn't know what they want, then it's up to you to show the consumer, hey, this is a new path. We're going to take you down this. Like, I think when Elon Musk developed, Tesla, I don't know that he looked at a form and a function for a vehicle. He wasn't as concerned about quality of the vehicle, because they're good vehicles, but they're not necessarily well made. So for him, he was much more focused on technology and being a technology company that's end product is an automobile. But Porsche, on the other hand, is about racing and engineering. Everything that goes into a Porsche starts with the engine and the transmission and the expectations that the consumers now have. And Porsche is probably one of the best examples of a company that, if you look at the 911, it really hasn't changed much over a 50-year period of time. But in so many ways, it's radically different than the first car. But it's subtle, little differences. And that's how great design truly works. That, like, today's Porsche is much more comfortable than the old Porsche. It handles better. It's faster. It even gets better gas mileage. But they know their consumer doesn't care about gas mileage, so they're not going to go in and say, well, we're really happy that you can get 33 miles to a gallon in a 911 on the highway if you drive it at 65 miles an hour. That's not who their consumer is. But who their consumer is, like if you look at Chevrolet and the Corvette, the American consumer who generally buys a Corvette, all they care about, and it's the same. The Tesla consumer is very similar to the Corvette consumer in many ways, because they're both concerned about 0 to 60 times. But a Porsche owner doesn't care about 0 to 60 in the same way. A Porsche owner is more concerned about the handling and the engineering of the vehicle. The Corvette owner, all they want to do is go from traffic light to traffic light as fast as they can, 0 to 60. And it's a very different consumer. The Corvette consumer is almost never going to be the Porsche consumer, and the Porsche consumer is never going to be looking at a Corvette because he can save $30,000. It's not worth it for him or her. And so you have to understand and take all of those things in. Are you a premium brand? If you're a premium brand, there's a whole different set of rules that you have to follow. You have to be more selective about what retailers you go into, because a premium brand doesn't go to Walmart right away, because Walmart's not a premium retailer. Walmart's all about giving you the cheapest price that you can get. Costco, on the other hand, is not about cheap price. It's about value. So you're buying a much larger pack to get to a value. But all of those things say who you are. I remember when we were working on the Pop Chips brand, Costco said, hey, if you didn't go with a black bag, you could probably save another 20% off this price and get us down to a lower price. And we're like, okay, yeah, you're right. And if we put it in a paper bag full of shit, we could save even more money. But that's not who we are. Pop Chips is a premium brand. We're 30% more than every other chip. We're not trying to be Lay's potato chip. We're trying to be a completely different chip and a different experience. And so all of those things have to be thought out and taken into account when you're doing that, from the typography to the design of the lip on a can to you can't ruin the experience of drinking water out of a can if it tastes too much like aluminum, because that's going to impact the taste and people aren't going to buy it. So you have to think about all those things. And if you're a really good design firm or a marketer, you have to be thinking about those things as well. Because if you select something that's really beautiful and exciting and all that other stuff, but it has an impact on the flavor that is negative, you're gonna run into a problem. I always say one of the most important things about design, because designers have a tendency sometimes to design for award shows because they have such a distaste for clients that, and it's true, it's just they don't talk about it publicly. Most of them just can't stand their clients. So the question is, when you're designing something, at the end of the day, for me, everything has to sell. Otherwise, it's just very expensive art. And I'm not in the business of working with clients to create art for them. I'm looking in trying to help them create something that will sell more. And so I know designers don't like thinking about it, but successful design does sell. And it's really important that designers understand that at the end of the day, if they want to if they want to stay in business and be really successful, it has to be more about selling sometimes than design, because you can create great design and also create items that sell. So, but if it doesn't sell, then you've just got an expensive piece of art on the wall. Or in the client's case, 100,000 cans sitting in a warehouse with no place to go.
That makes a lot of sense, Jeremy. So you've said a lot about the process, and I'm really interested in a little piece of it here, just to clarify. You've talked about the research, getting behind the scenes. You've talked about the consumer being last, which I love. It definitely is zigging while others are zagging, and I love that. I love that aspect, and I love the production quality and the level that comes from that. You mentioned that you're a copywriter and that your sister company or other partnership is the design side. When the research originates, it sounds like, with you, do you build a copy brief that describes the essence of the brand, the characteristics, and send that over so that the designers can sort of start to pick that apart and develop the art side to it? Is that the process there, copywriting first and then art?
It really depends on how things sometimes play out. I will say that with my own website, the Launchpad website, when I looked at my competitors, everyone talks about themselves. And I didn't want to talk about myself. I wanted to talk about my clients and who they are. And so when we talk about the Mavericks, the Misfits, obviously I stole from Steve Jobs because it's very similar to the Think Different campaign. But people love our website, and there was no design. We started with the copy.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something, this idea Eric had said to me, and Eric and I, since he does all the creative, and his wife, who's Deborah, is incredible as well. She worked on the finalized version of the copy. Eric and I were talking about, who are my clients, and they're mavericks, they're misfits. And that's why we have these quotes on our website, I found some very different quotes from different people. But if you look at the people we feature, again, it borrows a little bit from Apple's Think Different campaign. It's Truman Capote. Now, what would you think that Truman Capote would have to do with the design and advertising business? Well, he came up with a comment that, failure is the condiment of success. And I just love that because, first of all, I have no fear of failure, but it's a subject I've studied a lot because people are so worried about failing. And so I thought that was an important point. And then, Jim Morrison was about, from the lead singer of The Doors, was a lot about chaos and disruption. And he was trying to disrupt the music world and change the world in many ways. And so, so are our clients. Most of our clients are smaller food brands that are trying to go from 0 to 1 billion and become the big brand, but do so in their own way. So how the creative process generally starts with us is, and it can vary from client to client, but in the case with my website and how we were going to create, it came from this idea of how we were going to communicate, because the words to me were very important. So when we finished the words, then that would tell us how the design was going to come together. So without that, it didn't work. In other cases, we were working with a mint company that wanted to develop a new format for mints. And so Eric started with the design of the case because that was really the essential part of looking at first, because if we couldn't come up with the right solution, it didn't matter what the design was, the client wasn't going to be happy with it. And so we started with that, which then led us into the creative process at the end, and then came the copy. So it just really depends on the client and what the needs are for the project. Sometimes we're working with people that have a new product that they developed, but they have no name and they have no branding and they have nothing. So you're starting with an incredible clean slate, and that's where you can really become imaginative and do anything. And then other times people are coming to you and it's just a minor redesign. Like we worked with Red's Burritos, and he had this great story about his dog, but none of it. He had this image of his dog and everything, but he never told the story about the dog. And so we did that one, became a minor redesign on the artwork, and it was more copy work and repositioning than it was actual design work. But it all comes together in the end. It's just depending upon the client, the project, what type of project it is, determines how, where you're going to go. Now, Eric and I are like brothers, so we're really in sync with each other, like a good copywriter and a good creative team are at an ad agency. So we work really well together, and we spend a lot of time together and have similar interests. So we know how each other works and all that other stuff. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and it takes a while to get that gel. And so since we have that, it makes it really easy to work. And we're used to working with each other over 30 plus years. So
That's awesome. Let's take a step back a little bit and talk about you and how you got into typography. Where were you born and raised, and what led you to that decision in 1980 to get into typography as the launch of an incredible career?
well, thank you. Good. I never get to tell this story, so it's I like this. So I was born in New York, and I used to be much more. I always tell people I'm a New Yorker originally, but I'm more chilled now because of California. California,
East Coast to West. I like it.
yes, went from the East Coast. Our parents got divorced, and my mom said she wanted to move as far away as possible without falling off the planet. And so LA was the choice. And I now live in NorCal, but LA was where it was at. And I couldn't believe it when we got to LA, how beautiful the girls were at the time, because I was around, I think I was 14 or 15 when we moved out to SoCal. And my mom moved us out to the Valley, Woodland Hills. And how I got into the business was, my mom was in the concert business. And so, which is why I have such a love for music and rock and roll stars. Always wanted to be, but I have a terrible singing voice. When I was singing to my kids when they were young, they used to tell me to be quiet, that it was a rather offensive sound. So
you gotta love kids for their honesty. That's funny.
yeah. So we living in SoCal, it was a huge adjustment coming from New York. So but after a while, it was really cool because you could go to high school, and then as soon as you finish up your classes, we had the high school I went to, El Camino Real, had an open campus. So when you were done, you could split. So I would get in my car and I'd go to Zuma Beach and hang out with our friends and the surfers. And in 1979, my mom unfortunately passed away from cancer, and so I had to get a job, and because I had been working for her in the concert business. And that's a whole nother story until itself for another time. But a friend of mine, mom's, recommended me to go meet this guy, Drew Andreessen, who I had no idea what the typography industry was, but I could sell. So, and I could communicate. And so we met, and Drew handed me the keys to a company car. I mean, we really hit it off. He wanted me to come work for him. And what he didn't realize is that my car was about to break down. It was on its last leg. So I didn't care about the typography industry or the design and advertising industry, but I liked Drew. And he gave me the keys to this brand new Volkswagen Jetta. And it could have been anything. It could have been a wheelbarrow. My car was about to die. I had a Toyota Corona that I bought for like $900, and it was like on its last leg. So a company car, an expense account, the whole thing. I was like in a whole other world. But I wound up, falling in love with typography, which I had no idea what it was at the time. And working for Drew, who was a real perfectionist and had a love for design himself, we got to work with some of the greatest designers in LA. And even when art directors and designers would come out from New York for a photo shoot, they would always come in and use Andreessen. But we did probably 95% of every record album. We worked with Neil Diamond, Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo. We worked with almost every major ad agency and design firm in LA, like Keith Bright, who passed away recently. He's probably one of the greatest packaging designers of all time. John Van Hammersveld, who did work for Rolling Stone and surfing magazines, and is just famous for some of the most incredible design during the 80s and 90s, and people like that. And I just fell in love with the whole process. And it was, you're not going to learn that shit in college. I mean, hanging out and getting time to spend with somebody like Keith Bright or Jennifer Morla up in San Francisco, Mike Salisbury in LA, who worked on Francis Ford Coppola movies and did incredible design work as well. I mean, going out to lunch and just spending hours and picking their brains, and while I'm doing their typography work, and learning about the industry. That was my college, because when my mom died, I dropped out of college to take care of her with my brother. And my college was working with Drew Andreessen, and he was one of the first people that really knew how to promote a typography house, and did incredible. They did a piece with Clive Percy, who was this incredible illustrator, called Gripping Typos, which was the story about Andreessen, but he did a lot of work on the Pee Wee Herman show. And so, you're working with these incredible Rod Dyer and incredible rock stars of design and advertising, and you just soak it up. And then I started really learning about what great design was. Like Bill Cahan. Bill Cahan was famous. He did a lot of annual reports, and he's retired now. But like when people started complaining at companies that designers were designing the type too small and shareholders couldn't read it, he came up with the idea to attach a magnifying glass to one of his clients' annual reports, which was really cool. It was a great idea. And, people like that, Steve Tollison, Michael Schwab, Mark Fox, just, incredible people. You pick up a lot of things. The downside to it all is you become incredibly obsessed about great design, and you realize how mediocre most work is. And, it's when my wife and I got married, she was like, my God, you wouldn't, that you won't save money. You're like, it has to be designed perfectly, or you immediately reject it. And, I said, yeah, it's an obsession, but you're going to have to live with it. So I drive people crazy, because when clients come to me with stuff and I look at it and I'm like, I just had this happen with a client. This guy's got this incredible new chip. And I said, I can't work with you if you're not willing to redo your design. It's too mediocre. You're not explaining. And if you haven't guessed yet, I'm a pretty direct person. So I'm not worried about what other people think. I'm worried more about us achieving the results and being successful. And so, I learned from a lot of these designers, and from Steve Jobs and Drew Andreessen, that, while there's no really such a true thing as perfection, there is great work, and great work doesn't happen accidentally. It's a commitment and a way of life. And it's a lot like surfing and cycling, which when I was younger, I loved surfing, but love cycling more. And it's a whole nother world, and it's very competitive. But at the same time, you have to be committed to the process. There's a real process with design. It doesn't happen accidentally. It happens because people have really put their time in to create something. And it's unfortunate that, in transitioning from the digital world, we lost all the typographers, and the work has suffered, because you look at some of the typography today that young art directors are doing, and it's hideous. And there's been study after study of the psychological impact of good typography. And so, but at some point, digital made life so much easier, and it's a whole other world that you wind up moving on, and you mourn the loss of it, but it doesn't mean that I don't look at a brochure sometime and scream at it and call the creative director for the magazine and yell at him about how poorly designed it is. Like if you look at a magazine like Monocle, I don't know if you know Monocle, but it's a European magazine. They still use really incredible paper. And so the color really pops off of the paper. And when you turn the pages, it just feels so different in your hand. And then you get like Fast Company used to do the same thing, but to save money over the years, they use really shitty paper now. And there isn't that commitment to excellence anymore. So when you get a magazine like Monocle, which I believe is French, there's an appreciation. I feel like I'm holding a piece of art in my hands when I'm going through it instead of a magazine. And I spend a lot of time reading that magazine versus other magazines. So
That's incredible. Wow, what a fascinating story. And I believe it. I believe that when you stand on the shoulders of giants, like I am doing here on podcasts and shows like this, and like you did early in your career, you can become that giant. And your career has really reflected that, Jeremy. So it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. I need to publicly invite you to another one because I feel like I have so many more questions for you. And I
sure.
love the knowledge that you've shared. Do you have any final advice that you'd like to share before we wrap the show?
Yeah, I think what I would tell anybody listening is that now today it's more important than ever to be authentic and fight for what you believe in. Believe me, I've been fired on a lot of projects for telling people what they need to hear, but it's always been worth it to me because one of the things that these old school art directors believed in and the designers is that there's a level of quality that must always be maintained. And I live my life that way in my values and in my creativity. And I think it's really important because there's less of that today. There's more get it done, get it quick, get it done cheap. And there's still something great in products made in America, even if they're more expensive. And, I think if Levi's failed at one thing, it was really stressing the made in America. And I think if they had fought for that more, they wouldn't have had to go overseas. But I think it's really important that you fight for what's the best and that you have fun at what you're doing. And my last comment is don't ever love your job, love your family, love your life, but love is something that I've learned over the years because you can become really consumed by your job, which you never want to do. Love is something you hold precious and special, and it's for your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or girlfriend, and it's not for your job. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy immensely and get great gratification from your work, but your work will never love you back. And I think it's really important. I've realized that as I've gotten older, that my first wife paid a big penalty for my total commitment to work, and so did my kids. And so I just think it's important because you can be highly successful and creative and do what you want to do, and then love the hell out of everything else besides your job and have a great balanced life.
Amazing. Amazing advice, Jeremy. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, for sharing your talent and your skills with us today. Thank you for all of the knowledge that you have shared on this show. How can people reach you if they would like to follow up with you and ask questions, more questions about the Costco side, maybe engaging you in a rebrand and really getting things done the right way with you?
They can go to our website, which is launchpadgroupusa.com, or they can call me Everything is on the website, so they can email me, they can call me, and I will talk to anyone. So
Perfect.
even if I can't help you, maybe I'll give you a good piece of advice that I can steer you to somebody that can help you. So,
You're amazing.
but thank you very much. I really enjoyed this podcast. I've done quite a few, and I would have to say this was one of my favorite because I really like the questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeremy. Now I have your contact info pulled up here. So just so everybody has this when they listen to the show, the phone number, Jeremy's office number, and correct me if I say this wrong here, Jeremy, is 925-329-6425, extension 100. And Jeremy's email address is jeremy@launchpadgroupusa.com. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you again so much,
Thank you.
Jeremy.